I'm going to keep this very, very short because I'm sure that you're very eager to meet and listen to the next speaker. If yesterday we talked a lot about blockchain and how blockchain startups are struggling with building and fostering innovation in this field, today we are going to talk a lot more about artificial intelligence. So the first keynote presentation of the day is going to be about the future of supply chain systems. So let's welcome on stage Christian Lanng, founder and CEO at Tradeshift.
Good morning, everyone. It was a great party yesterday, I assume. So really awesome to be here. And actually, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in the intersection of blockchain, value, AI. And I know what you're all thinking, like, why would you invite a supply chain guy to speak at the first keynote the day after the party? It's a challenging topic. It's maybe not as sexy as AI or blockchain or ICOs, but it's a lot more real, so that's the good news. My name is Christian Lanng. I'm co-founder of Tradeshift. We have 3 co-founders. We're originally from Denmark. When we started out in Denmark around 8 years ago, I would say the startup community was probably where you guys are right now. It was scattered, it was small, there was a few startups that broken through, but the rest was sort of still waiting to get their day. And today we have a huge and booming startup ecosystem in the Nordics, as you know. So I'm really a big fan of creating as many local ecosystems and communities as we possibly can in all over Europe, actually all over the world, because that's what's going to power the next waves of innovation. So my goal is not to put all of you to sleep by talking about supply chain, but actually explain to you why this is one of the most important topics for the world today, right? So why do supply chains matter? You probably noticed over the last 12, 18 months that we have had a lot of political change in the world, right? We had Brexit in the UK, we had the UK decide to leave the European Union. A lot of that had to do with the feeling that there was not enough value created on both sides of the table. There was a lot of dissatisfaction in Cornwall, in the south of England, in north of England. And what's interesting about all of those areas where there was dissatisfaction was they used to be large European manufacturing hubs in the past. But they're no longer, because a lot of that manufacturing is now happening in China, happening elsewhere in the world. So supply chain change, and now we had political change. And it might be hard to see when it happens, because there's typically a 10-year delay between the cause and the effect. But it's very clear, as we reconfigure global supply chains, we're also changing the political conditions for the future. But it's not just in Europe, right? We have this guy. I live in the US, I live in San Francisco, so I have, unfortunately, to watch him a lot on the television. But that's how life is. But exactly the same story, right? A lot of dissatisfied voters in the Midwest, a lot of dissatisfied voters all over the US, especially if you look at the former manufacturing hubs, Detroit, elsewhere, there used to be huge hubs for production. A lot of those supply chains are now, again, moved around in the world. And while the coasts have gotten a lot richer, while the core central financial centers, innovation centers, etc., have gotten a lot richer, so if you look at it as the economists they like to do, just as GDP, it's true that GDP is growing. But if we look at it as a distance of value between, let's say, Detroit and New York, the distance is growing a lot, right? And that's creating these massive disruptions. And I know in tech, we like to talk about disruption, and we like to talk about things going viral. But I think for a long time, we have underestimated really 2 things. I'm a sociologist by education, and I can tell you that anything that's viral doesn't just mean it moves fast. It means it changes everything it moves through, right? So if you get a virus, if you get a cold, actually, your body changes, you have a reaction. And exactly the same thing with technology. I think in the beginning, if you go back 5 years, etc., we were hyping technologies like Facebook, Twitter, we're talking about them as viral. They were sort of the role model of tech companies to create something that just spread as fast as possible. But I think we forgot a little bit about the viral impact. So combined with some of these technology changes coming from supply chains, we suddenly had a media landscape that could give a lot of focus and voice to all of these people that were dissatisfied, and that's sort of what been driving some of the huge political changes we've seen over the last 18 months. And I really think as a tech community, we need to think about what is our role in all of this. And not just, and I know you have a lot of other speeches today, you talk about can democracy survive technology? I think, yes, democracy can survive technology, and I don't think democracy can survive without technology, but it's got to be the right kind of technology. Last bit here is, of course, the trade war between US and China, right? And while it might look like China has been the big winner for the last 10 years, they're now also kind of in trouble because they're trying to figure out how they can fit together with the rest of the world. And behind all of this is massive innovations in technology, right? But it's not this generation of technology. It's going back 20, 30 years, the invention of the ERP system, financial systems. And when we created all of these systems, we centralized all of the data, we centralized all of the supply chains. And because it was so easy to centralize, we also centralized all of the production. There was really only one way to run a global supply chain, and that was try to get as much scale as possible, which meant a lot of business went to China. So what's really, really important to understand is supply chains, they run the world. Supply chains design how the world economy functions, and by an effect and cause of that, also how our political systems work. So I think it's something we should think a lot about. And if we go back to sort of some of the visions when we created the internet, right, we had this idea of an open democratic platform for communication. And I think one of the things that's been really inspiring, and there are a lot of challenges, I think, too, but one of the things that's been really, really inspiring about the blockchain movement have been this idea of an open economic web for value, for transactions, for payments, for finance. And that's exactly the opportunity we have today. I think we should maybe focus a little less on what are the specific technologies, but much more on how we can create that. And the existing solutions, they don't really scale. All of these systems are made to be offline systems. Most large enterprise platforms today, they're not really meant to be on the web. They probably shouldn't be. To be honest, if you are average size Fortune 500, you have somewhere between 50 to 100,000 suppliers. A system like SAP expect you to hand code a connection between you and all of your suppliers. That's going to take a long time, be very difficult and very brittle and break very easily. So we kind of need to move beyond that. But it's also pretty clear that the companies who used to benefit from these technologies the last 10, 15, 20 years are no longer. In the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies has disappeared. It used to be, I think, that we felt a Fortune 500 company was something eternal, right? Something that never goes away. These are these giant names we all know from the billboards, from the advertisements, etc., that will stay around. The average lifespan was 75 years in 1955 for a Fortune 500 company, and today it's 15 years. So there's a close link to how we did the digitalization of these companies, how we set up our supply chain for these companies, and what's happening today. So it's very clear that everybody is sort of being disrupted by the position we put ourselves in. And I think we talk about it as a positive, but obviously also have very negative political impacts across the board. So why is all of this happening right now? Why is it that 2018 is very special when it comes to what's happening to large corporates versus, let's say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? The world has lived in a long period of stability. Most of us that have startups today haven't experienced the financial crisis, especially not two of them. Most large companies have been able to have stable supply chains and digital platforms for the last 15 to 20 years. So everybody started optimizing for the same thing in big business, which was the lowest possible cost of running transactions, right? I know we have a lot of shared services here in Bucharest, for instance. That's all about making cost of transaction as low as possible. But something happens when you optimize by building huge standardized infrastructures that's very hard to change, but very cheap to run. And that is, you might be lowering your cost of transaction, but you're increasing your cost of change. So if you ever try to change a system like SAP, they say on average it takes 4 years to roll out a change to a large company. 4 years is a long time when the world moves as fast as it does today, right? I mean, imagine what will happen the next 4 years we didn't even know about today. We might have invented quantum blockchains, or we might have AI that actually work. So there's a lot of potential over the next 4 years to change the world many times over. But if your core business platforms can't move, you're either going to figure out a way to adapt or you're going to go away. And that's exactly what's happening to the Fortune 500. All of this is, of course, powered by Moore's Law. And I think as geeks, we all know Moore's Law, right? We live with it every day. And I think we have a tendency to think, oh, it just means my phone will be a little faster, my web pages will be a little faster. If you're a coder, it means I can be a little bit more sloppy in my code because it'll probably run the same speed that it did yesterday. But actually what's happening is it's becoming so powerful that rather than just making these devices a little smaller, a little thinner, it's going out into the physical world and all aspects of the physical world. And I think the most dramatic disruption and revolution that people are not even seeing right now is what's happening to the physical world, powered by Moore's Law. And of course, just a few examples of that, right? If you look at global internet devices, we're around 2.5 billion, we're about to cross 2.5 billion. But if you take in Internet of Things, you can do 10x of that, and that is today. I checked the other day in my home, I have around 60 devices that's on the internet. That's up 300% over a year. And probably going to continue to go up quite dramatically, which means the industrial internet is already many, many times bigger than the human internet. AI funding is going up exponentially. We still have to see if the results will go up exponentially, but the funding is going up exponentially. And I think, again, as consumers, we might be dazzled by Siri and Alexa, but the potential of automating supply chain, automating decisions, among large companies in the world is probably 10 times larger than what is in the consumer space. Industrial robots growing at an exponential rate. And what's really, really cool about industrial robotics of 2018 is it's not these huge machines you've seen in the car factories of the past. They are small robots. You can get them, you can put them on a table. You can take them by the hand, and you can show them the moves to make. So a regular worker can just train a robot. You don't need a team of Accenture consultants to put up your robotic farm. And the robot will then repeat those moves. It'll stop if you get close to it, because it's using machine learning to figure out what's around it. And that means we can start building, for instance, small batch manufacturing everywhere in the world. We don't need huge factories to manufacture at the same cost. It used to be making 1 million of these sneakers was the only way I could get the cost low enough, but now I can make 100 of these sneakers, and I can get it at the same cost, and I can make them with that really cool, unique design that I want with a very limited batch production, because we have access to technologies like this. Projects on Kickstarter obviously exploding. We are just going straight to consumer. What used to be a huge, complex supply chain, I was talking with a car company who had the problem that it took them 10 years, roughly, to design a car and bring it to market. So they would start with the idea they had for the car, they would design it, and then the marketing operation will start marketing, this is the car you gotta have. In 2018, it's all about having a blue, hybrid, whatever car. But they said that doesn't work anymore, because we start building a car, and consumers, they start tweeting in about what kind of car they wanna have, or they figure out they don't even want a car. Or it should be an electrical car, it should be a self-driving car, it should be an electrical scooter instead. It used to be a car was number one thing on everybody who was 18 years old in North America to have. Today, it's not on the top 10 list. Number one thing is an iPhone, because an iPhone comes with a built-in car. It's called Uber. So we can go straight past the big global manufacturing chains. We can set up organically, essentially a production. We can put our platform, our project, our design on Kickstarter. We can get the funding to do it. We can find the small batch manufacturers who can build it pretty much everywhere in the world. And we can bring it to market using platforms like internet and social media. So suddenly, we can orchestrate global production as consumers the way we want with the products we want. And finally, this is the installation curves of renewable energy. And what you will notice is this is both battery capacity and solar capacity. And what you will notice very quickly is it's growing at an exponential rate. But it's something very, very physical, right? I mean, batteries, they need to be built. Solar panels, they need to be put up. But the reason that the yield is increasing exponentially is it's completely driven by computers. If we have faster computers, we can do better materials. If we can do better materials, we have better conversion rates from energy coming from the sun into our solar panels. If we have better materials, we can store more in our batteries. So what is really truly, I think, from 2018 and onwards, sort of going to be the big disruption is that Moore's law have moved from the digital to the physical, and it's really pushing everything else in the world at an exponential rate. And that's also where a lot of the opportunities are going to be in the future. So as you think about yourself, I mean, I saw we have Fitbit out there. What better example is there actually of that, of being in the physical world? But as you think about it as entrepreneurs, don't just think about the digital world, because the digital world is a very crowded space these days. I saw just like marketing automation startups, there's like 10,000. When we started Tradeshift, there was only one Tradeshift in our category. I'm very grateful that I started a startup 8 years ago and not today, because today there'll probably be 1,000 players in our category. So exponential technology requires exponential strategies. But most companies, especially large ones, they think linearly. Let's increase production and sales 10% next year. Well, that's not really going to help you, is it, if your competitors, they move exponentially. Uber is a good example of something that moved exponentially across the globe and took the global market for personal transportation and created a company that was worth more than GM in less than 4 years because they had an exponential strategy. So lots of examples of companies from exponential strategies meeting companies with linear strategies, right? Amazon meeting classic retail, SpaceX doing rockets versus a very, very linear industry which has been producing rockets exactly the same way for 50 years. 3D printing for prosthetics and healthcare, where the big medical companies, they didn't want to do these things, so people just started doing it themselves. They started doing their own prosthetics, they did their own robotic hands. There was maker forums on the internet how to do that. And that became a whole new industry as well, right? So the physical world is being disrupted, and it's been disrupted very, very fast and very quickly bottom up. And all of this is sort of driven by Moore's law as a platform. And while we're seeing also these massive political changes, I think, really coming from what I call post-industrial digital systems, the idea we need to centralize everything, that we need to put everything into huge systems and run it very linearly, we need to put everything to China. That's what gave us Brexit, that's what gave us Trump, that's what gave us trade war with China. But I actually also think in exactly the same next generation of these technologies are all the promises that can make things a lot better. Because we can do decentralized production, decentralized manufacturing. We can spread the value much further today, right? And so I think it both, and this is the thing with technology and the democracy question, it both holds the promise and the threat, right? So the problem is this is very, very hard to think about. And that's a classic old story. It's a little bit, depending on where you hear it, from India or China, it doesn't really matter. But this guy, he invents the chess game, and he's pretty proud. He thinks it's a cool game. He goes to the king. He says, hey, I have a cool game, so you don't have to be bored. You can do something else than just sitting and staring into the wall. And the guy goes, yeah, this is pretty fun. How can I reward you because you gave me entertainment? And the guy, he goes, well, I'm just a humble guy. I'm just a humble farmer. So maybe you could give me a little bit of rice. You put 1 corn of rice on the first field of the checkboard, and then 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and you probably guessed where this go. And the king thinks, oh my God, such a moron, I would give him anything in the world, and he just want a little bit of rice. Unfortunately, it's 5 times the rice in the world, because of the exponential function, 64 fields. So the guy, he loses his head, and probably learned a lesson about that as well. But it really shows a big human problem, which is we're very good at understanding the first half of the chessboard. So when we think about technology, we have a tendency to think that's what's going to happen the next 10 years, exactly the same as the last 10 years. Next 10 years, Amazon is going to be bigger. You know, Apple is going to be bigger. We already seen what's happening. The web is going to get a little faster. We're maybe going to get virtual reality, but it's still going to be kind of clunky. You know, all of these things we project from the last 10 years. But the problem is the last 10 years are the first half of the chessboard. And the next 10 years is the second half of the chessboard. And we don't want to make the mistake the king made, or the guy who invented the chessboard who lost his head. Either way, because we need to really think about what does that mean for the physical world and the disruption that it's causing. So what if we could build a new kind of supply chains? What if we could build a new kind of trade that could leverage all of these changes? What if we could build platforms that could enable decentralized value, that could enable everybody to participate? And that's exactly what we've been trying to do for a number of years at Tradeshift. We think about it as open, flexible, democratic supply chains. We did not call it blockchain 8 years ago because that word did not exist. But we thought about it as an internet of value. And if you look at our vision, it's very simple. It's been the same vision for all 8 years, to connect every company in the world, creating economic opportunity for all. And that's really truly what we think is the next generation of the internet, is really a global open platform for trade that everybody can connect to, everybody can build value on top of. That's not a walled garden like SAP and Oracle, where you have to have like a developer license and everything to just go and build something for a company that creates value. So we started fairly small. This was in our garage in Denmark. There's a few of the people who are in that room, in the room today as well. If I have one piece of advice, and it probably goes for Romania as well, is do not start your company in a garage in a country that have winters like we do. It's a very bad idea. It looks cool, you have a great story to tell, but it's really, really cold. So the way that we thought about Tradeshift when we created it was really, most SaaS applications and most web applications tend to be what I call single-user tools. They're a little bit like your old Nokia. I mean, it was really cool, it was indestructible, but it only had the features that was on the phone to start with. If you wanted to do something else with it, you have to wait for the next version, right? And of course, Apple, they changed all of that with this device. We're no longer carrying around a CD player, a Discman, a camera, a map, a radio, all of these things we used to have. It's just a platform. And exactly the same way we built Tradeshift, we said, what is, instead of building a system like SAP, where it's a monolith and a walled garden, what if we could build an open platform, connecting companies and their business processes, but then allowing everyone in the world open access to the data, open access to build value on top, open access to create apps that could sort of do value add in all of these different domains. So that's what Tradeshift became. It's an open platform for supply chain. We have more than 2.5 million companies on the platform today, all over the world, more than 190 countries. And what's really cool is it's a complete multi-tier network. So if you think about how businesses have started to connect, in the beginning it was just point to point. 2 consultancy teams on both sides, wiring companies together. Then we got the web portals. And then today, finally, with something like Tradeshift, we have a fully open global network for business. And we really just do 3 things for our customers. It's very simple. We do end-to-end global supply chain payments, end-to-end global marketplaces. Anybody can go and build their own version of Amazon on top of our platform, on top of our architecture, but for B2B. We have some of the largest companies in the world building marketplaces today for their areas, but we also have entrepreneurs, startups, building it within their domain. And then finally, an app platform that allows you to build and take all of these components from global trade and put them together in new ways. If you want to build a logistic application, why not start out with a network of global companies you can access right out of the box? Why do you want to know about global VAT compliance? Trust me, you don't. So that's all built into the platform from the beginning. And at Tradeshift, we pretty much just say everything will be apps and everything will be networked. We already seen this as consumers. And I think if we think about it as consumers, technology moved in 3 very distinct stages, right? We had on-premise, then we had cloud, and then we had networks. And we tend to think cloud lasted a long time. But I'll sort of push you very hard to try to think about even one app you're using that is not networked. I think the only cloud app that I really had that wasn't networked before all of this was Picasa. I could upload my photos and then they sat there. But today in the world of Instagram, Picasa seems pretty silly, right? Like, I mean, it's just put them in there and then what? So it's very clear that once you're in the cloud, networks are the natural stage that happens next because the cost of connectivity in the cloud is so much lower than it is on on-premise. That's also the reason the networks, they don't really happen in an on-premise world. But in business, we think cloud is the end stage. We think it's about taking SAP and making it into SAP in the cloud. But that's not at all what it's about. It's about taking SAP and turning it into a network in the cloud and giving everybody access to all of that value you can do from that connectivity. And how that works in the real world, so these are some of our customers, is once you start connecting one company, they all follow. So we put DHL on the platform. They brought in Kuehne + Nagel, who's a huge freight forwarder. Then we got UPS. Then we got FedEx. Today, we're connecting 70% of all logistics companies in the world on our platform. They pretty much said, well, if you want to be in logistics, it's kind of stupid not to be on Tradeshift because everybody else is there. So that's the network effect of supply chains. And just some of the app partners we have on the platform today, and we are actually developing and building a lot of our third-party apps right here in Bucharest every day. So that's one of the areas that we see growing the fastest. So setting up Tradeshift to be a network from the beginning, to think about it as an app platform for business rather than a big monolithic system as SAP. For 5 years, it was like shaking a ketchup bottle. We're just going around telling everybody about this vision, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? No, we're going to have SAP, thank you very much. But then, just like the ketchup bottle, when you shake it hard enough, suddenly you have ketchup everywhere. I think this is pretty much how everyone in Tradeshift, they feel about it these days. Today, we run supply chains for 150 of the Fortune 500s. And while it's very cool to talk about blockchain, from a trade perspective, we're already doing more trade than all of the blockchains in the world combined on this platform. You can go play on it today. 3 times the GDP of Romania. Next year, it'll be 5 times, so 3 times the trade flow of Amazon. And as you can see here, it's growing pretty fast at the moment. So we think this is really, really cool, although a topic like supply chains on the surface might sound a little boring. We actually think this is sort of touching the true economy of the world. We're covering 190 countries today. There's very few countries we don't operate in. We have offices in 14. And we often have to use Google Translate just to try to figure out what on earth are people trading on our platform. What are people buying in Malaysia and then selling in Germany and then retrading in America? So it's kind of cool to sort of see all of these flows and these applications being built both locally and globally. So this is all sort of, I think, fairly cool, although it's still, as I said, a boring subject like supply chain. So what is it we see as next? We see that humans are really going to disappear from a lot of what we call the boring transactions. I know there's other big Romanian companies, I've got to be very careful, who talk a lot about robotic process automation. We think it's the other way around. We think that AI and machine learning are going to sit on the transaction layer and automate all of the transactions. You don't really need a human to look at an invoice or a purchase order or a payment and figure out if this should be paid or not. In fact, you probably shouldn't. We looked at some of our data and we saw that human approvals, if you put a message in front of a human saying, should we approve this? Yes, no. In 99.5% of the times, they say yes. Why? Because if they say no, somebody's going to bother them. So if you say yes, it's not your problem anymore, it's somebody else's problem. Ada is our AI layer across the whole Tradeshift platform. It was born here in Bucharest, actually in 2017. It's built by the Tradeshift team here at a giant hackathon we had. And we are looking to apply Ada to pretty much every single business process that run on the Tradeshift platform. It's something that we're continuing to develop right here. So if you think machine learning, neural networks, all of this stuff is cool, there's a big chance to come and work at this as well. So, of course, the most important thing of me being here is, this is all very awesome, Christian. How do we get a job at Tradeshift? I'd be hard-pressed if I missed to tell you that. So you go to tradeshift.com/jobs. We have 14 global offices. We have 145 people right here in Bucharest, and they're all building product every day. It's not an outsourcing center. They own a lot of our product lines. So thank you all for listening. I hope it was a little bit inspiring here early in the morning. I know it was a great party yesterday, so that was really all for me. Thank you.
Questions from the audience? Okay, we have one question here, so if one of my colleagues can help me with the mic.
There's a mic coming.
Yes, immediately. Right there in the front. Okay.
Hey, thanks. It looks...
It's okay.
I hope it works, huh?
Yes.
It looks impressive. I have one question. One of the issues in supply chain, it's the availability of people, especially in the traditional one. Would you like to build in your platform also a recruiting part
So
to
the
add more
question is,
benefits to your platform?
so the question is, recruitment was one area, right? Yeah. So recruitment, getting people to work in all of these areas is one of the big difficulties. The way we view it is, why don't you build that? There's a whole business to be built just around recruitment on Tradeshift. We actually have app partners like Manpower, who's now providing temp labor as an app. So if you have a supply chain process, they can give you access. But the idea is, why can't we create that value locally? Why can't we have startups that can tap into that value and then build it from there? Our job is to connect all of the threads and make it available and make the value available for partners like you or others that can see that value, right?
One last question there.
Hi there. Sebastian from Supply Blockchain here. So, quick question for you about the apps platform, the third one that you were mentioning. So, do they keep their own independence? Are they built only for your platform, or how does that work?
So we actually, and you mentioned blockchain, and I think Supply Blockchain was the name of it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So we have a security front end that you can map into. We, of course, have to make sure that it's a secure context, that you run in all of that. But you have your full own independence. In fact, we have something called the blockchain gateway, which allow blockchain, right now, Ethereum-based apps to talk with our front end and other way around. So it's absolutely possible for you to have your own app in your own context and be independent of our platform. But we want to help you get access to a lot of the things that is not available right now on blockchain, such as users, value, transactions, all of these things, right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.